35 years ago, China's military, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, was, to put it mildly, stuck in the past. The blurb read great, mind you, with them having enormous reserves of tanks, fighter jets aplenty, and even intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could wipe out a city on the other side of the globe in mere minutes. But crack the cover to start reading properly, and you'd soon discover that the tank force was built around a design originating in the 1940s. Those fighter jets were low-resolution photocopies, and the ICBMs were slow to deploy and inaccurate, able to just about hit a city if a suitably high-yield warhead was stuffed in the pointy bit at the end. Fast forward to today, though, and they are not that anymore. A second edition of the proverbial book is needed, and they have properly turned this all around. That which was once a sprawling, quantity-over-quality relic has now been reshaped into a far leaner, far more capable force fielding stealth fighters, precision missiles, modern armor, carriers, drones, and a much more professional core of troops. There's a rough edge here and there, certainly, but the transformation as a whole is nothing short of staggering. And today, we're going to be walking you through that transformation, looking at the tanks, ships, aircraft, missiles, submarines, drones, and indeed the ideas that have dragged the PLA into the 21st century. Just before we continue with today's episode, a quick word from our fantastic sponsor. So I realised something pretty stupid recently. So look, the internet can be a pretty dangerous place to be if you're not careful. But you can be very, very careful if you use today's sponsor, Surfshark. Surfshark's a VPN. So basically what it does is it hides your IP address and encrypts your data, meaning that what you're doing online is a lot harder for people to track or mess with. But the really useful part is just how practical it is. Let's say you're on a public Wi-Fi, at the airport, in a hotel, in a cafe, whatever. You probably know that that's a bit risky. While Surfshark just remove that risk altogether. Plus, they also let you change your virtual location, which means you can access content that's normally locked to other countries. Netflix. And they've added extra stuff too, like a built-in ad and tracker blocker, and even a tool that checks if your email shows up in data breaches or scams. The main thing is, you just turn it on and forget about it. It runs in the background, and that is it. Running right now. If you want to try it, go to surfshark.com/mega or use the code MEGA at checkout to get 4 extra months for free. It's one of those things that's just worth having on all the time. You don't even think about it. The only time I think about it is when that little VPN thing shows up in the top corner of my iPhone. That's it. It's fantastic. And now back to today's episode. The realization. Now, there were multiple moments that made the PLA wake up and smell the coffee. The low-key shooing they took in the 1979 Sino-Vietnam War, the 1995 to 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis, and the 1999 bombing of their embassy in Belgrade, to give you just a few examples, all of which, in their own way, highlighted various uncomfortable truths. But they were, all of them, dwarfed by the sheer terror that was the 1991 Gulf War. Now, TLDR, for those of you not in the know, back then, Iraq had one of the largest militaries on Earth, usually given as the 4th or 6th largest. Their troops were also seriously battle-hardened, courtesy of the Iran-Iraq War, and they had a huge infantry of armor and artillery to boot. Then, after Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990, the US and a coalition of over 30 other nations got stuck in Kuwait's defense and simply obliterated its military in 43 days. Brick by brick, tank by tank, Iraq's ability to wage war was systematically dismantled, first from the air as command posts, air defenses, logistics hubs, bridges, and armored concentrations were hammered relentlessly. Then the troops went in to deliver the coup de grace, with the ground offensive actually only lasting around 100 hours before large formations collapsed, retreated, or surrendered en masse, just like that. As quickly as it had started, the war was over. And as for why this terrified China so much, it was because of stark similarities between their own military and that of Iraq. Then, therefrom, the obvious realization that that which had been done onto Iraq could just as easily be done onto them. Back then, you see, the PLA, just like Saddam's army, was fundamentally a mess. It was a ground-heavy machine built around armor and artillery, with limited, at best, strategic integration between the branches, and basically nothing by the way of real-time surveillance, electronic warfare, and precision strike capabilities. They weren't so much lagging behind with their doctrine and their tech as they were still in the bloody Stone Age. As then leader Jiang Zemin himself, in power from 1989 to 2002, put it, quote, "The facts of the Gulf War show that, with advanced technology applied side in the military field, the precision of weapon strikes increased to an unprecedented level, and the side with a high technology advantage clearly held more battlefield initiative. In today's world, if a country does not strengthen its defense capabilities and improve the quality of its forces and its ability to fight under modern, especially high technology conditions, is not strong, then once war breaks out, it will often fall into a passive position of being beaten, and its national interests, national dignity, and international prestige will suffer major damage." End quote. So, what did he, and more broadly the military that he headed, actually do to right the ship then? Well, a lot of it was actually rather unglamorous stuff. Yeah, it was vital, no mistake about that, but not really big cool new machine, wow, go, look at it, boom, boom. It was the work on the strong and stable foundation that makes said fancy machines both effective and indeed viable at all. For example, it's things like doctrine, a military standard way of fighting, and the agreed ideas and rules for how it plans, trains, and commits its forces during war. And for the PLA, reform there meant slowly doing away with the legacy Mao-era notion of people's war, whole-nation guerrilla warfare, basically, and replacing it with a whole dictionary's worth of ever more sci-fi sounding slogans. For example, there was local wars under high-technology conditions, thrown around by Jiang Zemin, which became local wars under the conditions of informationalization. It's a mouthful, isn't it? This came from Hu Jintao from 2002-2012, which then took its current form of informationized local wars under Xi Jinping, president from 2012 to present. Similarly, in their combined armed joint operations concept, i.e. the high-level ideas that explain how all the armed services are meant to fight together in one integrated campaign under a single plan, joint operations by multiple services under high-technology conditions became joint operations under the conditions of informationization, which in turn became integrated joint operations. Fortunately, because informationization, that's not even a real word, China. You can probably see the overall picture we're painting here. They have been accepting their situation for what it is, and pragmatically, slowly, doing something about it. There were, of course, specific measures brought in to help realize all of that too, with the first one of note being 1993's Military Strategic Guideline for the New Period, which shifted the PLA's posture away from being a force designed to defend against a giant land invasion to being a force able to project power in China's immediate surrounding locale. That scope was then broadened further with ever more white papers over the years, with the next one worth looking at being 2004's China National Defense, which began laying out how that, Jesus Christ, informationization concept that they had such a stiffy for was actually going to come together, which can be best surmised as fewer bodies carrying fancier kit, particularly fancier communications kit. Fast forward to 2015, and China's military strategy began to push a specific tilt towards the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, and the People's Liberation Army Air Force, or PLAAF. They explicitly called for the PLAN to move from a narrow offshore waters defense posture to a combination of offshore waters defense and open seas protection, and for the PLAAF to shift from territorial air defense towards a force that could conduct both offense and defense in integrated airspace operations. By 2019, in China's national defense in the new era, they were talking about implementing a military strategic guideline for a new era, built around joint operations, space, cyber, and the strategic support force, all the behind-the-scenes plumbing that you need for a modern precision strike military, basically. And of course, underpinning all of that, big and ambitious as it was money. Or rather, the fact that China actually now had some money. You see, in Mao's day, China was, no two ways about it, really bloody poor. And now it is really very much not poor. Thanks to Deng Xiaoping's socialism with Chinese characteristics reforms and everything that came thereafter, best surmised as being literally everything Mao ever said, keep the hammer and sickle as a skin suit for legitimacy, and bring in a new social contract where you just pragmatically make the people richer if they agree to shut the f*** up and not question the status quo. With that, China has gone from a GDP per capita of $320 in 1990 to $13,300 as of 2024, and an overall GDP of $18.7 trillion. And crucially for our story today, defense has been riding along in that rocket. Because even though Beijing keeps the official line at a fairly modest 1.5 to 2% of GDP, the underlying pie has grown so fast that PLA spending has chalked up years and years of high single-digit, sometimes double-digit annual increases in real terms, with their final 2025 military budget claimed to have been just under $250 billion per the State Council, but maybe nearer
to 300 billion when you factor in the bits tucked away in other ministries, at least according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And with all of that being all the wider context and bigger picture that we could possibly need, now we're going to get into the properly cool the actual machines that China has been buying to drag its military out of its Gulf War-era malaise and right into the 21st century. Tanks and armored vehicles. Let's begin with the coolest of the lots, tanks, and indeed armored vehicles more broadly. Basically, post-Gulf War, the PLA's armored fleet was truly vast, around 8,000 main battle tanks, or MBTs, in 1990, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. But the fleet was dominated by older designs that were really showing their age. Think Type 69 and Type 80, and those basically all harken back to the Type 59, itself basically a Soviet T-54A that the Chinese then made badly and left half of the good bits off. Things as basic as the original T-54A's main gun stabilizer and its infrared searchlight and night fighting setup. Although later 59s did get spruced up a bit. And it was the same story for their mechanized infantry carriages too. They did have armored personnel carriers or APCs, but they were subpar, to put it mildly. The Type 63, for example, was basically a Chinese spin on the basic idea of the Soviet BTR-50. Thinly armored, amphibious, room for 10 soldiers, and that's about it. As for infantry fighting vehicles, or IFVs, APCs with the proper bit of shooty thing, basically, they just didn't have that. That did change as quickly as 1992, though, with the introduction of the Type 86, a BMP-1 ripoff, but we're still talking about a really crude machine here, with really thin armor, reasonable firepower, completely dumb old-school comms, but at least there were room for 8 soldiers in the back and the mobility advantages of being aquatic. In fact, it's a gross simplification would be the first to admit, but put it this way to get the basic idea. By the time Beijing was putting its Temu-grade BMP-1 into service, Moscow had already got the BMP-3 in service, which, as the name rather gives away, was 2 generations worth of refinements and improvements ahead. Now though, while some of those legacy systems are clinging on to the peripheries awaiting their replacement, such as the Type 88, another evolution of the Type 59, exercising in Xinjiang in 2021, the quality of their armored vehicles is now significantly improved as a whole. The poster child of it all is the Type 99, China's first true modern MBT, and a machine built around everything that Desert Storm made quite clear was now non-negotiable in a tank. Seeing first, shooting first, hitting first, day or night, whilst moving, and doing all of that while being part of a wider combined arms system. As for how it achieves all that, that's reportedly thanks to the inclusion of things like a thermal sight with a laser rangefinder, plus a handy-dandy onboard auto-tracker function. An independent commander's 360-degree panoramic day and night sight, so the commander can line up the next target while the gunner does their thing on another one. A full fire control stack that includes things like a digital ballistics computer, wind sensor, muzzle reference system, thermal barrel sleeve, the works, in other words. A dual-axis, upways and sideways stabilized 125mm smoothbore cannon fed by a carousel autoloader also allows a streamlined 3-man crew to operate everything. Onboard information and communication done well. It's got a full radio suite, identification, friend and foe, IFF systems, and onboard information processing. Survivability aids like an electro-optical countermeasures suite and a laser warning receiver and good old-fashioned smoke launchers are also present. And while very valid questions exist concerning how good all of this really is, such as whether or not that carousel autoloader will end up launching the turret up into the sky like the Russian ones do, it's still very much a question of how good the Type 99 is, not if it's good. We know enough about it to deduce that quite clearly it isn't just some polished up turd rolled out for the camera's benefit. In fact, if there is a glaring problem with it at all, it is to be found in its availability. At the moment, you see, no official given figure seems to exist for the amount in service, and believe us, we spend longer than we rightfully should have looking. But a 2024 strategic paper by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies came to the conclusion that they then had around 1,100 Type 99s, split between the normal one that we just explained to you and the very new to service even now 99A, and that's in a total MBT force believed to be in the mid-5000s. And just off that, slam the brakes on, because that changes things massively, making the Type 99 not a Chinese Abrams, a good MBT, which is just the norm in its given military, but a good tip of the spear. Available in decent numbers, yes, but not the standard. Instead it's this, the Type 96, which is the true workhorse of the PLA, a cheaper, slightly older design that still brings a 125mm gun, composite, and later explosive reactive armor too, stabilized specialized sights, and much better engines than the old T-54 knockoff series. I like the Temu version. They believed to have somewhere in the region of 2,500 Type 96s across all variants, with the rest of the MBT force being the aforementioned Temu series that have found themselves relegated to training units or backwater garrisons where foreigners with their narrative-ruining cameras don't tend to wander. And this presents a problem because from that, you might be inclined to assume that the story is they're working towards the Type 99 being the MBT, slowly but surely, and once they phased out all the old crap ones, they'll then start phasing out the Type 96 and keep going until, well, happy days, it's Type 99s everywhere. Certainly a valid assumption, but the issue is we just do not know what they are planning in this regard because the messaging out of the People's Republic is fairly mixed. For example, Xinhua, a state-owned news agency, did a big spread back in 2014, calling the Type 99 our Army's new main battle tank and China's land warfare trump card. But then that very same year, the English-language China Daily, state-owned again, was confidently telling readers that China's military is likely to deploy the Type 96B tank as the pillar of its tank fleet, replacing most of its old models. And then, just to really throw all of that further askew, have a look at this. The Type 100. The short version, it's the new hotness. Unveiled at the 2025 Victory Day Parade, it is billed in Chinese media as a fourth-generation main battle tank with an entirely unmanned turret, a 105mm main gun, advanced radar, a hard-to-kill active protection system, and even augmented reality aids for the crew, plus a few buzzwords about AI and highly intelligent coordinated combat because it's 2026, why not? Western write-ups of the parade and later analysis, they all converge on the same basic picture. A three-man crew sitting low in the hull, a remote weapon station, and sensors piled into the turret, and a hybrid diesel-electric drive that can move the tank quietly in full electric mode, cutting noise and infrared signature. We have, flatly, no idea how many they have, nor how many they want to have. Beijing hasn't told us, and it's not even been a year since it was unveiled as of the time of writing, so we're somewhat lacking in broader evidence with which to speculate. But then, that's the Chinese MBT situation in a nutshell, isn't it? They have this big myriad of seemingly perfectly agreeable stuff and yet crickets on specifics. Mercifully though, their non-MBT armor situation is clearer. The Type 15 light tank, for example, which entered service in late 2018, is a tank built in light of the fact that half of China is one big mountain. Light at around 30 to 35 tons, decent shift thanks to that lightweight and 1,000 horsepower engine, a modern 105mm gun hooked up to an autoloader and decent optics. And running alongside it, you've got a whole menagerie of now actually respectable infantry rides. The Type 04, for example, is the current creme de la creme IFV. Introduced in 1999, it finally gives Chinese mechanized infantry a modern BMP-3 and kind of Bradley equivalent, a tracked amphibious chassis with a two-man turret mounting a 100mm gun and a 30mm autocannon combo, a room for a squad in the back, and crucially, halfway modern fire control, thermals, and radio so it can actually maintain proper situational awareness. The Type 08, meanwhile, is the PLA's answer to Western 8x8 families like the Striker or Boxer. Rolling into service from around 2008, it's a modular, wheeled chassis that comes in all the usual flavors: IFV with a 30mm cannon turret, plain APC, command post, recon wagon, and so on. Crucially too, however, it's amphibious, so it can swim rivers and coastal shallows without drama. It's not glamorous, but it quietly drags huge chunks of China's light and medium infantry out of clapped-out trucks and into something that can actually keep up with the tanks on roads and tracks and survive light enemy fire. And speaking of amphibious vehicles, consider this next. The Type 05, developed specifically for the People's Liberation Army Navy Marine Corps, fitting all of the ones in one name, aren't we, China? It's a whole family of fast amphibious assault vehicles built around the same hull, with an IFV variant with a 30mm cannon turret and an assault gun with a low recoil 105mm gun plonked on top, being the most interesting examples. Both are designed to sprint across open water at quite sprightly speeds, mid-20s kph when giving it the beans before dropping the jets, clambering up the beach, and trundling inland. In other words, where the old kit was basically floating APCs be-reet, the Type 05 gives the Marines something that can actually keep up, actually keep talking to everyone else, and actually put some proper gat down on a shoreline instead of just being ballast with a machine gun. And we could go on. I mean, seriously, China has introduced a lot of vehicles since the Gulf War. But you get the idea. They've gone from slightly shit T-54 knockoffs and ratty BMP-1 clones to a layered fleet of heavy, light, wheeled, and amphibious armor that, at its best, absolutely belongs in the modern club. Sure, there's some older stuff clinging on in the peripheries, but as a general rule, there can be no doubting that China's armored vehicles have come a long, long way. Aircraft. The PLAAF was probably the branch most terrified by the Gulf War because there is no two ways about it. While they were not a token force, nor just a mere paper one, their capabilities back then were absolutely horrific by the standards of the day. Basically, the 1960s Sino-Soviet split, where Moscow had fallen out with Beijing over the finer points of how murdery communism needed to be, had all but killed Chinese aerospace advancement dead as technological aid simply ceased thereafter. As a result, they had spent the 30 years before the Gulf War largely trying to fettle and improve that which their northern neighbors had left them, with, for example, the Soviet MiG-21 becoming the J-7, later indigenously improved to the J-71 and J-72 and J-7H, among others. Same deal with the tanks too, incidentally. That's why everything was a Type 59 derivative or development, while the Soviets went on to the T-62, then the T-72, then the T-80, and so on and so forth. There were some efforts to guide alone in the skies, though, to bring it back to the matter at hand. The J-8, for example, a super MiG-21 of sorts. If we simplify the matter, it took 11 years to eventually come into service after its first test flight, and the initial variant still didn't have look-down radar or a proper all-weather capability. Instead, its tech sheet was Mach 2, guns, basic infrared missiles, a radar that could only look where the nose was pointing, and that was about it. They further refined it, of course, but even the J-8A, the top model come the Gulf War, still had no look-down radar and shockingly unreliable electronics. Then there were the advanced envelope-pushing projects of that period, which just outright failed. Consider the J-9 by way of an example. Its development commenced in 1964 and was meant to be the interceptor, a new global standard that would smash Mach 2.5, climb up to 23,000 meters in less than 2 minutes, and have cutting-edge radar and missiles of all flavors coming out the wazoo, and nothing came of it, with the program having its plug pulled in 1980. Hell, they couldn't even make a proper modern civil airliner without it all going to buggery, with their main stab at it, the Y-10, having just 3 prototype units made before the plug was pulled in 1984 because it'd be cheaper just to buy foreign ones, and the foreign ones were better. And all that's to say nothing of the broader capabilities that they just didn't have. AWACS, for example. They had banged a big radar set on top of a Tu-4, itself an unlicensed, reverse-engineered knockoff of the B-29 put together by the Soviets, crammed some turboprops in, and that was it, a single prototype dubbed the KJ-1. It then had its development cancelled when it was found to have unfixable vibration issues. Similarly, beyond visual range combat by aircraft was basically something they couldn't do, they just didn't have the missiles. Just as they also didn't have any precision strike capabilities, the very one that allowed Saddam's military to be destroyed so expediently, or strategic strike capabilities. Now though, there's no two ways about it. They are a world leader and field what in all likelihood is the second best air force on Earth behind the United States. Start with the poster child, the J-20, a twin-engine, roughly 20-meter long, all-weather stealth fighter that formally entered service in 2017 and now appears to exist in the 300-plus kind of mark, if Western estimates are accurate. Under the skin too, it's got all the things that'd get 1991-era Chinese engineers rather excited. A big, active electronically scanned array radar, ASA, in the nose, an infrared search and track and other passive sensors scattered around the airframe, and a proper glass cockpit to fuse it all together. The centerline weapons bay can also haul at least 4 PL-15 missiles, reported to have a 200-kilometer range, and the wings can further be stuffed if they don't mind sacrificing its stealth profile. Not exactly a MiG-21 in a fancy frock, is it? And indeed, even China's more mundane modern fighters are leagues above anything they were fielding in the early 90s. The J-10, for example, is a single-engine multi-role machine with its own ASA set, helmet-mounted sights, PL-15 missiles, and a fully digital cockpit. Basically a do-everything, go-everywhere workhorse, while the twin-seat J-16 is a big, long-legged strike fighter that can lug a silly number of precision-guided bombs and anti-ship missiles under its wings, guided by modern sensors and data links. It has a proper glass cockpit too, rather than whatever the fuck this analog menagerie from its forerunners was meant to be. Oh, and we can't forget strategic bombers, the big boys, of which China currently is one of only 3 nations on Earth that even have them, the others 2 being Russia and the United States. At face value as well, this is actually one where it looks like China has not made much progress, as their stalwart strategic bomber, the H-6, first entered service back in 1969 as a licensed-build version of the Soviet Tu-16 that first flew back in 1952. But here's the thing, all mainstay strategic bombers still flying have core designs that are ancient. The US B-52, for example, also first flew in 1952, as did the Russian Tu-95, and they've both been heavily redesigned and rebuilt inside and out to be the modern high-tech cruise missile launching platform that modern strategic bombing demands they be. And the H-6 is no different, with its most recent variants, the H-6N, being a very different beast to the original. Gone are the old WP-8 turbojets, replaced by either Russian-built D-30KP2 turbofans or their indigenous WS-18 copy, giving far better range and fuel burn. The bomb bay, of all things, is gone, swapped out for larger fuel tanks and accommodations for a single huge ballistic missile like the nuclear-capable JL-1, tucked in under the line of the fuselage, supplemented by underwing pylons for further mounting missiles like the CJ-20 cruise missile and the YJ-21 hypersonic missile. Avionics too, totally redone. So yeah, it's an old design, but as an example of China lagging behind, it's not that. They've also got a proper stealth bomber, a la the B-2 in the works, a capability currently only the US has. But as a recent video of ours explained at length, we know all about the H-20, as it's been dubbed. It is coming, it is going to be a bona fide stealth bomber, and that's essentially all we know. And all those capabilities that China didn't have during the Gulf War, well yeah, they've got that covered too. Take AWACS, whereas before they couldn't even get one rickety old KJ-1 going, now they're sporting a full spread of airborne eyes. Big IL-76 based theater controllers in the KJ-2000, smaller turboprop KJ-200s and KJ-500s to plug the gaps and ride shotgun over the coast, and now even carrier-borne KJ-600s. All of them quite agreeable platforms according to the information that we actually have. Then there's the strategic airlift, a thing China can now properly do thanks to the Y-20, their first homegrown, vaguely C-17 equivalent transport. It can haul around 60-odd tons of kit and up to and including a single Type 99 MBT or a pair of Type 15s over intercontinental distances, with it being believed that China has somewhere in the region of 100 or so of them. This is a genuine ability to throw brigades of troops and armor around Asia by air, rather than doing whatever they could with whatever few spare IL-76s that the USSR and later Ukraine and Russia was able to sell them. We've already touched upon beyond visual range combat too, simply by mentioning that the PL-15 is now a thing when discussing the J-20, but their getting that capability goes far beyond just a single good missile. Instead, what really matters is the whole chain wrapped around it. The modern AESA radars in the noses of J-10Cs, J-16s, and J-20s that, on paper at least, can actually see out into the same low hundreds of kilometers bands that the PL-15 can reach, tactical data links that let fighters quietly share tracks with each other and with ground command posts, and those airborne early warning aircraft that we just met feeding in a much bigger picture from hundreds of kilometers away. Add in proper mission computers and software to sort, declutter, and prioritize all of that vital data, and suddenly a PLAF pilot isn't just pointing his own nose radar at a blip and hoping. He's but one shooter plugged into a huge kill chain that can hand targets off and keep feeding guidance updates to missiles already in flight. And that's a hell of a transformation in all, isn't it? From a flat-out subpar force that just about had teeth sharp enough to deter a full-scale invasion to what we firmly believe is the second best air force on Earth. The US pips it, of course, because their capabilities and numbers are just in a whole other league, one of their own in fact, but who else is coming close to China and what they can do now? No one. That's who. Missiles. And now a capability that China has improved to such an absurd degree that there is every chance that they are the best at it, period. And that, of course, is missiles. Title of the section gave it away, didn't it? And we really should stress the word absurd when describing how far they have come too, as back during the Gulf War, the 2nd Artillery Corps, forerunner to the modern People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, was still, at heart, a nuclear deterrent outfit stuck with a small inventory of big, slow-to-use systems and basically nothing by way of modern precision strike. In no small part, this was due to a near total lack of any supporting infrastructure, because an effective missile system isn't just the bit that goes bang, it's the satellite satellites, sensors, data links, and command systems that allow you to find a target, feed the coordinates, keep updating them as the ground situation develops, and then, finally, guide the actual munition to the final destination. Now though, they more than have the lot. As examples, Beidou, an indigenously developed GPS alternative, first switched on regionally in 2000 and then globally in 2020, letting China navigate and guide weapons with its own sat-nav signal rather than relying on a US-controlled network. The Gaofen 3 radar satellites that now fly in a small land-sea constellation around the Earth in a 755-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit, which is perfect for finding and tracking ships so that long-range missiles actually have something precise to aim at. Then there's Jian-1 constellation, a very big commercial but very much dual-use imaging fleet, ideal for giving Chinese planners sharp, frequently updated views of ships, ports, and air bases to feed into their missile targeting. And finally, big coastal over-the-horizon radar sites along the mainland's coast that use skywave and surface wave tricks to spot and track large ships and aircraft thousands of kilometers out into the Pacific, and then passing their general hits up the chain for refinement by satellites and other sensors. TLDR then, they happily have all the behind-the-scenes plumbing needed to actually use all their fancy new missiles, and if you were wondering, save for a key few outliers like the US, very few nations have anything like this whole stack at scale and actually stitched together into one big, ready-to-f**k-you-up kill chain. And concerning the actual fancy new missiles themselves, we've got two words for you. Hypersonic. Actually, I think that's one word, George, who wrote this episode, i.e. Mach 5 and above. For reference, the speed of sound at sea level, because its speed varies depending upon altitude for reasons we don't really need to worry about today, is 1,235 kph, or 6,175 kph for the full whammy Mach 5. And that, quite simply put, is an absurd speed, vaguely in the ballpark of 6 to 7 times faster than a normal civilian airliner. And we're not just talking about some one-off paper thing either, a totally exists but you never actually see it, trust me bro missile. No, it is a real, deployed capability. Consider as an example the DF-17, a road-mobile 1,800 to 2,500 kilometer range ballistic missile that carries a hypersonic glide vehicle on top. First rolled out publicly in 2019, it's believed that it has a Mach 5 plus final approach speed. The YJ-21 is an anti-ship ballistic missile for the Navy, typically launched from Type 55 destroyers. It was unveiled in 2022, is believed to have a roughly 1,000 to 1,500 kilometer range and speeds of about Mach 6 and up. It's a carrier killer, basically. The very thing Beijing will be pointing at NATO carriers if it ever tries to take Taiwan the hard way. The DF-27 is a bigger, longer-legged hypersonic-capable missile that is vaguely akin to a conventional intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, but with a hypersonic glide option when it's coming back down to Earth. It's potentially in service as of the time of writing, according to the US Department of Defense's 2024 annual report to Congress, military and security developments involving the People's Republic of China. It's a mouthful, but Beijing themselves have yet to confirm this. On the matter of the DF-27 too, Beijing also hasn't come out and cleanly stated it's X kph fast, at least as far as we could find. But Chinese language discussion of it nearly always repeats the exact same figures about it covering 2,100 kilometers in testing, equivalent to Mach 8.5 or Mach 9-ish, as well as saying explicitly that its final approach speed to a target is Mach 10 plus. Consider, by way of comparison, the efforts of the Americans. The Air Force's AGM-183A air-launched rapid response weapon started its development back in 2018, and it was meant to be operational by 2022. It was shelved in 2025 and then is supposedly back in development as of the 2026 budget. And then there's the Army's Dark Eagle, which has had its launchers and support kits sitting with some units since 2023, but its first successful end-to-end flight test only happened in December 2024, and actually fielding, long promised as coming, has yet to happen. In fact, Russia is basically the only other nation that even comes close to matching China with things like the Kinzhal and Avangard, but they are more showpieces available by the handful rather than a deep, well-integrated family of hypersonic munitions delivery systems. And as much as we've been focusing on hypersonics so far, don't think that that's the only missile type that China has improved since the Gulf War. Consider their ICBMs. Back then, their force was basically a tiny handful of DF-5s, with the DF-5A variant back then being the top shelf one. And while the 5A may have had a range of up to 13,000 kilometers, enough to hit the entire continental United States, and a warhead yield of up to 5 megatons, or 333 times the explosive yield of the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima for reference, it actually wasn't all that. For starters, it was liquid-fueled when solid-fueled ICBMs had been the done thing since the 1960s and the arrival of the American Minuteman and Soviet RT-2 missiles. Because basically, you can leave a solid-fueled missile ready to go, so when World War III comes, all you have to do is wheel it out, point it at the sky, input the targeting date, and press the big red end-of-the-world button. Liquid-fueled ICBMs, by contrast, cannot be left fueled, and so the delay in getting them going can create a major gap in a nation's retaliatory capabilities, as nukes could well be landing on your silos, or while you're still trying to get the go juice into your own missiles. But that was only one problem with the DF-5A, as it also had truly shocking accuracy, with its circular error probable, or CEP, the military phrase for how much it could stray from the point on the map you aim it at, believed to be anywhere from 500 to 3,500 meters. And that, incidentally, is exactly why it had such a large warhead, to offset its shitty accuracy. Now, though China's laughing, the DF-5 is clinging in there as the DF-5C, still liquid-fueled, but with a range pushed up to 20,000 kilometers and accurate enough to have its single big warhead swapped for a multiple independent re-entry vehicle, or MIRV arrangement, that stacks multiple smaller warheads that can all be targeted independently. Joining the fray are the all-new ICBMs like the DF-31 and DF-41, and it's not just the big ones that have seen radical improvements either. Conventional ballistic missiles, for example, have also been improved. Back then it was the DF-11 and DF-15 at the top end of things, the former of which entered service in 1992 and the latter of which entered service in August 1991. And with them, we're talking a range of 300 kilometers and a CEP of 600 meters with the DF-11 and 300 with the DF-15. Now, it's things like the DF-26. It's improved in things we can measure, with a range of up to 4,000 kilometers and a CEP described only as high, thanks to how new it is, having only been publicly unveiled in 2015, but it's also improved in its more abstract qualities, like it's having a maneuvering re-entry vehicle that makes it harder to intercept, rather than the simple ballistic re-entry body of its forerunners. And say what you like about how there's a good chance of them being fired at one of us one day, you gotta give Beijing its due. All of that is a hell of a turnaround, isn't it? Like we say, we firmly believe they are currently the world leader in missiles. There's just no one else who can come close to this effort anywhere in the world, especially when we take their hypersonics into account. Submarines. Now, after discussing an area that China has come to dominate, we find ourselves discussing an area where it actually still has quite a bit of work to do: submarines. Come the Gulf War, China did actually have quite the substantial submarine force. But of course, it was only substantial at a glance, because yes, they did have 63 in-service hulls in all, but the bulk of that number was made up of this: the Type 033 attack submarine, a copy of the Soviet Project 633 class, which was diesel-powered, crewed, and originally hailed from 1957. Crewed, C-R-U-D, not C-R-E-W-E-D. Of course it would be crewed and crewed. But at least it was actually capable of operating entirely under the waves, thanks to design cues pinched from the Nazi Type 21. They also had this, the Type 35, an improved version of the Type 33. It basically ditched the old Project 633 twin-shaft layout for a more powerful single-shaft drive that was faster and, crucially, quieter. And if you think that sounds like a bit of alright for a sub of the 90s, let us nip that idea in the bud right here and explain that actually, no, it was not. The Americans, for example, were rocking this, the Los Angeles class, as their go-to attack submarine of the period, a 30-plus knot, deep-diving, nuclear-powered hunter with towed array sonars, serious quieting, and the ability to launch Harpoon and Tomahawk missiles at sea and land targets, respectively. The Soviets, or the Russians, given what particular year of the 90s you're looking at, similarly had this, the Project 971 class, big, fast, nuclear-powered, serious sonar-fitted, clever propellers, and a truly nasty loadout of torpedoes and anti-ship missiles. Well, the Beijing didn't have nuclear submarines because it did. In the attack subclass, i.e. equivalent in role to the Los Angeles and 971, for example, they had this, the Type 91, the class of 5, which were first commissioned in 1974. Problem though, they were a bit shit. Loud, vibration-prone, basic sonar and weapons fits, and a reactor that, put it this way, when one of our team here had a chance to poke around one in the Qingdao Naval Museum, they sided with caution and politely refused. They also did have a ballistic missile submarine too when the Gulf War broke out, the ones that launched city-killing nukes. But when we say a ballistic missile submarine, we are not referring to a singular class. No, we mean one unit in service, the Changzheng 6. And that was it. And again, despite the whole city-killing nuke business, she was actually just a bit shit as well. Noisy as a lit pig, plagued by all manner of technical problems and almost never trusted far from port. Her short-range JL-1 missiles also basically forced her to loiter in coastal waters, or else the only thing she'd be nuking would be some fish. Compare that to the ballistic missile submarine efforts of the Americans and the whoever were in charge in Moscow that week, with the former sailing around with whole squadrons of Ohio classes, each packing 24 MIRV-spec'd missiles with ranges on the order of 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers, and the latter fielding deltas and typhoons, which basically packed the same punch. And you get the idea. Once again, not a comedy effort from Beijing in the Gulf War period, but nothing like a cutting-edge or world-leading effort. All that mighty force was back then was a slightly above average brown water force, one that could not in any meaningful way project power internationally. And now, well, actually, like we said at the beginning of this chapter, they've still got some way to go if we're being frank, but they are still leagues ahead of where they once were. The Type 33s, for example, are gone, with the only ones left being museum ships. The Type 35s, however, soldier on as a rank filler of sorts, while Beijing works on fancier and more cutting-edge designs. But they have been radically upgraded just to at least try and keep them competitive. The Type 35G, for example, swapped in a modern fire control system so it could actually fire proper wire-guided anti-sub torpedoes, not just old-fashioned do the maths and fire in a straight line torpedoes. And then the 35B took it further still by throwing tube-launched anti-ship and land attack cruise missiles into the equation. So yes, the Type 35 is very much still a submarine of the 1950s, but think of it more like one of those resto-modded classic cars. Objectively not as good as something made yesterday, but good enough to at least not proactively make your hair fall out with stress. And speaking of your hair falling out, China has also really upped its nuclear sub-game. Consider, for example, the Type 93 attack submarines, which are what the old 91s always wanted to be. Proper 30-knot nuclear hunters with hull, flank, and towed array sonars, much better quieting, far better punching powers thanks to modern heavyweight torpedoes, and long-range cruise missiles like the YJ-18 family, and in later variants even vertical launch cells. Then there is the Type 94 ballistic missile submarine, everything the Changzheng 6 wasn't, long-legged, quieter, even if Western analysts still believe they're noisier than modern American or Russian equivalents, and instead of knackered-out JL-1s, they come packing 12 JL-2s on the earlier boats and JL-3s on the newer ones. The JL-2, if you're wondering, is generally assessed as being able to take either a single big warhead or multiple smaller ones MIRV style, and the JL-3 is widely suspected to offer the same, just in a more refined package, but that just remains educated guesses because, shockingly, would you believe the exact loadouts are not something that Beijing has decided to spell out for us. It's a shame, we know. And also looming on the horizon is their next-gen nuclear attack boat, the Type 95. Details are fuzzy, but the basic direction of travel is clear. The Americans have their Virginia class as their top-shelf attack sub. Quiet, long-ranged, stuffed with sensors and cruise missiles, and the 95 is to be a Virginia with Chinese characteristics. A fatter hull to hide more kit and keep things quieter, and a bigger bank of vertical launch cells. However, as we say, while this is no doubt a huge improvement over that which they had during the Gulf War, there is still some work to be done here. In fact, the subs are probably the part of the PLA most in need of some love. Then there's the issue of the Type 39 A, B, and C, a series of totally new diesel boat classes. They're good by diesel boat standards with air-independent propulsion, decent quieting, and respectable underwater endurance, but they are still just diesel boats. And like we say, thanks to the US raising the bar, diesel is just not the stuff of a top-shelf submarine nautical power anymore. Also, consider the raw numbers. Depending on the sources and the exact year you're counting, open source tallies usually put China at around the 60 mark for total submarines, including roughly 6 Type 94s and a single-digit number of nuclear attack boats, with the rest being diesels. And while that's not bad at all, the UK has 9 subs, India's got 18, there's no two ways about it. It is nothing on what the US and Russia have, with the former sitting sitting at 67, all nuclear, and the latter hovering somewhere around the 50 to 60 mark, with a far greater share of them rocking a reactor as compared to China's fleet. For TLDR then, China clearly has made a lot of progress under the waves, but it is not a global leader in the field, and there's just no two ways about it. They don't have enough hulls, and if what they do have, not enough of them are nuclear-powered. That said, the direction of travel is clearly in the right direction. All it takes is one bumper order of 95s and finishing the 94s as a class of 8 as Beijing claims to want, and we'll be arriving at a very different conclusion. Drones. Drones were very much in their infancy during the Gulf War generally, but they did still play their part. The RQ-2, for example, a diddy little catapult-launched reconnaissance UAV developed jointly by the Americans and the Israelis, it was launched off battleships like Missouri and Wisconsin to guide 16-inch shells onto Iraqi coastal positions, and even famously coaxed an entire Iraqi garrison on Fallujah Island into surrendering by simply hovering overhead. The first time in history that soldiers are believed to have surrendered directly to a drone. And that's very much representative of global drone tech where it then stood. Good for observation stuff, yes, and that's about it. China, however, wasn't even doing that. They had 2 drones of note back then. This, the WZ-5, a reverse-engineered, jet-powered American AQM-34 recon drone. Beijing shot several down in the 60s, which, do note, did not give a live data feed or respond to live inputs like the RQ-2 did. It flew on a predetermined path, landed, and then was recovered. And this, the CK-1, originally a Soviet LA-17 that they got most of the blueprints for before friendship was cancelled with Moscow, and then they finished it themselves. Like the WZ-5, it was jet-powered, but was mostly used as a target drone, with a bit of nuclear blast testing thrown in as well. Now, though, things are very different indeed, as China not only has caught up with the Americans, it may even have, from certain angles, beaten them. Allow me to explain. Broadly speaking, modern PLA drones fall into 3 camps: the surveillance and reconnaissance ones that see, the combat ones that strike, and the envelope pushers that just do more in one way or another. The first camp is filled with things like the WZ-7, a serious high-altitude, as in 18,000 meters high, a reconnaissance drone with a weird, but by most accounts effective join-the-wing layout that affords it decent endurance, usually believed to be 10 or so hours depending on the flight profile. It's been in PLAAF service from 2018, we think, with airframes having been captured by satellite imagery over in Tibet, down on Hainan, and across in the vague area of the North Korean border. It also has a naval variant as of 2023, usually seen in the east of the country and South China Sea in the Taiwan kind of area. And its job, beyond just vague hand waves about reconnaissance, is hoovering up radar and electronic transmissions over vast areas, feeding targeting data back to long-range missiles, and of course, snapping pictures and videos. Bit of a step up from the WZ-5 of old, isn't it? Step out or wrong while staying in the same camp, and you find things like the BZK-005, the medium-altitude, long-endurance, male workhorse. It comes with a satellite link hump on its back and an electro-optical turret underneath, and it was unveiled at Zhuhai in 2006, and is now usually spotted on outposts like Woody Island in the South China Sea. Its performance places it very much in the middle too, cruising around 8,000 meters with 30+ hours endurance, all while quietly feeding back a live picture of who's sailing or flying where. And there's also the TB001 fitting the same general profile. But then we get to the ones that strike. Here it's the Winglong and Rainbow series that matter most, China's answers to the US's Predator and Reaper drones. It's the dependable stuff that breaks no records nor blazes any trail, but that turns up, takes some perfectly agreeable pictures, blows some shit up in a manner efficient enough not to offend the Chinese taxpayer, and moves on. A Winglong 2, for example, is a 20-meter in-span turboprop drone with 6 hardpoints, 30+ hour endurance, and the ability to sling AR-1 and AR-2 guided missiles, as well as the odd small precision bomb. You can see what we mean, it's pretty normal, it's basically just a Predator drone by another name. The CH-4 from the Rainbow series, for its part, is that, but a bit bigger, a Reaper by another name basically. Up to 345 kilos of ordnance on 6 pylons, a 30 to 40 hour endurance when in pure recon role, and the ability to fire missiles from 5,000 meters, comfortably above the reach of most light air defenses. Hell, it even looks like a Reaper, save for the lack of a vertical stabilizer and its air intake being flipped 180 degrees. The ones that strike do come even smaller though, such as with the CH-901, a little 9-kilogram loitering munition, i.e. a kamikaze drone that a single soldier can fling out of a launch tube, send buzzing 10 to 15 kilometers downrange, and then plunge right into and destroy a light vehicle or entrenched position thanks to the diddly little 3.5-kilo warhead. Doesn't sound like much, we know, but here's a little something to put it into perspective. An American M67 grenade has 180 grams of bang stuff, and the CH-901 has 20 times that, and it can be flown right at you. So it suddenly doesn't sound so weedy, does it? And there's also the fact that they can be launched from 40-plus unit truck-mounted racks in one giant wave, specifically to swarm an entire contested area, which is pretty fucking terrifying if we're honest. And then finally, we get to the exciting stuff, to the Jerry Anderson stuff, the envelope pushers, the drones that push the very limit of what an unmanned aerial vehicle can achieve. Consider our personal vote for the maddest, the GJ-11, a stealth-flying wing with an internal bay festooned with weapons that first flew in 2013, and is now officially described by the Chinese state as being fully in service. It can, of course, strike ground targets and take pictures of them, presumably all but unseen by radar, and just for clarity, we say presumably because China has never actually released anything concrete to prove its stealth credentials. However, and this is where it gets genuinely wild, it is claimed that it can also not only strike aerial targets, crazy enough when the Americans have only just started trialing AIM missiles on their Reapers for self-defense and limited air-to-air strikes, but also act as what the Chinese call a loyal wingman, i.e. a semi-autonomous attack dog that flies out in front of a manned fighter, usually shown teamed with a 2-seat J-20 in the state-approved CGI, soaking up missiles, jamming radars, ferrying extra sensors, and even firing its own weapons on targets that the pilot in the mothership designates for it. It's genuinely wild stuff. And then finally, there's the WZ-8, the fast one, reportedly Mach 3 capable, rocket-powered, and apparently able to reach altitudes of 50,000 meters or halfway to space. Some like 5 times the altitude of the plane that takes you on holiday, by the way. Believed to have entered service back in 2019, we think it's a pure recon platform because, shockingly, would you believe it, Beijing hasn't decided to tell us the full ins and outs of it. As a further point too, so seriously does China take drones that they launched this in December 2024, the Sichuan. Beijing calls her an amphibious assault ship, which, to be fair, she is, but such a title misses a particular key, and indeed revolutionary, part of her design. The fact that she is the world's first proper, i.e. intentionally built that way from the keel up, drone carrier. She hasn't been commissioned as of the time of writing, still being in sea trials, but Chinese state media is making her eventual capabilities very clear, with one Xinhua write-up calmly noting that she is designed to carry dozens of helicopters and drones in her hangars and on her deck, and that the headline feature is an electromagnetic catapult and arrestor gear specifically sized for fixed-wing unmanned aircraft. As Global Times further put it in their coverage of Sichuan's launch, she is the first ship of her kind in the world, a hybrid assault ship and drone carrier whose catapult will let it launch and recover everything from big stealth attack drones to long-range reconnaissance UAVs, giving the Navy the ability to throw swarms of combat and recon drones off a single hull and bring them back aboard again, carrier-style, rather than treating them as a sideshow bolted onto a traditional helicopter assault ship. And Sichuan also serves as a fantastic pivot for the last thing that we wanted to discuss in the chapter, how the drone efforts of other nations stack up in comparison, because we really want to stress just how well China is doing here. Because yes, other nations do have drone ships, Turkey's Anadolu for example, and she actually beat Sichuan to the punch. She started life as a Juan Carlos I style amphibious assault ship that Ankara planned to fly F-35Bs from. Then President Erdogan did a naughty by buying up some Russian S-400s, and Washington kicked Turkey out of the F-35 program, and suddenly the Anadolu didn't have any jets. Luckily though, Turkey also happens to have a seriously good drone industry. So a gamble was made. Recenter the whole thing around Bayraktar TB3s and the jet-powered Kizilmas, and thus make unmanned aviation the headline act. The result, when Anadolu finally was commissioned in 2023, Ankara was more than happy to bill her as the world's first dedicated drone carrier, which she was, but Sichuan remains the first built intentionally for drones from day one. There's also the Iranian Shahed Madavi and Shahed Barman Bagheri. If ever been sunk by the time of publication. Container ships converted into drone carrier-style vessels in the last few years, and that's literally it in the whole world for drone carriers. So yeah, China's doing well here. As indeed they are with all of their drones, because lest we forget, during the Gulf War, their effort was headlined by 2 antiquated reverse-engineered foreign recon models. Carriers. We really have saved the best till last here, because if there is one thing that China has really turned around post-Gulf War, perhaps even more so than its missiles or its drones, are its aircraft carriers. Why? Well, because back when Saddam was cleaning egg off his face, China had no carriers at all, not a single one. And nor had it ever had any. Such things are the preserve of the big boys, of the true global powers. And China, as we have seen in many chapter lead-ins now, simply was not a member of that club back then. But it had long since been an ambition of theirs, and so they already had a little something in their possession. HMAS Melbourne, a 1955 commissioned Australian carrier that they bought back in 1985, only to scrap her, of course. Nothing for anything naughty, like, say, stripping all of her most critical and complex systems such as a steam catapult and then reverse engineering them to learn all of their secrets for themselves. It definitely wasn't that, it was the scrap metal. And so it was the post-Gulf War, when they started to take military modernization seriously, they already had a single toe tenderly dipped into the aircraft carrier pool. Still, a long way off actually having a carrier to field, of course. They are rather complicated machines after all, but it was a head start that certainly didn't do any harm. Next, they started acquiring more buggered-up old carriers still, this time by cashing in on the fact that the Soviet Union had collapsed, and so there were people basically giving carriers away, so long as you, again, promised to scrap it and not do anything naughty with it. Minsk was the first, an old Kiev-class carrier that newly independent Russia decommissioned in 1993 and then sold for scrap in 1995. Then it was Kiev, the lead ship of a titular class, also decommissioned in 1993 but sold in 1996. Then finally it was Varyag, a Kuznetsov class launched in 1988, but that had its construction abandoned at 68% completion thanks to the collapse of the Soviet Union. She eventually found her way to China in 2002. Nowadays, Beijing has still never intentionally come out and admitted to their ruse from back then, but it does slip out from time to time, as this little extract from a 2011 article written by, edited by, reviewed by, censored by, and released by the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry, quote, "In the 1980s, China dismantled the retired Australian Navy aircraft carrier HMAS Melbourne, and in doing so, accumulated some basic knowledge of aircraft carrier construction." And that small little line has a lot of different eyeballs give it once over before it was published, every pair of which was wired up to a brain who knew the real deal. So yes, they were hoovering up carriers for reverse engineering, and we imagine some people in China got in a lot of trouble. And as much as we'd love to tell you more about their stories, because every single one of them is full of weird twists, mad turns, and crooked deals, we only have time to focus on one today, Varyag. She presented an opportunity for Beijing, the ability to put everything that they had learnt to use, not with the slightly terrifying prospect of building a whole new carrier from the keel up, but by simply finishing off someone else's half-completed work. 68% complete as she was. And indeed, that's exactly what they did. And Liao Ning, as she was now to be known, was commissioned into the People's Liberation Army Navy, the plan, on the 25th of September 2012. And you gotta give China credit here. A Nimitz-style supercarrier, she is not, but they have done a perfectly respectable job, as Liao Ning went to sea as a thoroughly modernized Kuznetsov-class, short takeoff but arrested recovery ship, with a big ski jump at her bow for takeoff, arrestor wires for recovery, and a basically all Chinese combat system under the skin. She kept conventional steam turbines rather than going for anything exotic or nuclear-y, and on a typical load she has 24 J-15s, 10 Z-18s, and 2 Z-9s in her belly. So you see what we mean? Not world-changing, not envelope-pushing, but a legit, functional, modern carrier. So a very big deal all the same, as there aren't many nations who even have one. It only becomes an even bigger deal too when you consider that she is a sister ship of the Admiral Kuznetsov. For those of you not in the know, the long story short is that independent Russia kept her going with duct tape until 2017, and she's then been moored up ever since with a return-to-service date that keeps getting pushed back, and back, and back. But what of China? What were they to do now that they had proven that they could make a carrier so long as they had the training wheels on? Well, make one without the training wheels, naturally. Enter Shandong, commissioned in 2019. She has some minor fettling around the edges, but she really is just another Yao Ning, only made totally by China this time. Easy. Because now that it knew with confidence that it could build and operate carriers, did it A, keep things conservative, pump out more perfectly agreeable Yao Nings and Shandongs, or B, did it keep pushing, go for bigger, go for more, go for, dare we say it, a supercarrier? In the end, much to the relief of hype-hungry YouTubers the globe over, they went for B. But they weren't being stupid about it. As far as carriers go, they'd just broken into a walk, and a supercarrier was a full-on sprint. So rather than risk falling flat on their face, they opted to next simply break into a jog by building a super-ish carrier, the Fujian. And what makes her super-ish? Well, she is the first Chinese carrier to fully incorporate a catapult. Melbourne would be proud, and a flat-top deck rather than the off-the-ramp and dump-throttle bigly method of her older sisters, meaning that she can launch fully laden aircraft. Further too, because she comes in at a healthy 80,000-ish tons in displacement, she can also carry way more aircraft than her sisters, with Chinese sources typically saying something in the region of 60 to 65 aircraft. Crucially as well, all but 10 of them are fixed-wing aircraft, rather than the 2 out of 3 proportion of fixed-wingers to helicopters that Liao Ning and thus Shandong 2 can squeeze in. As for what's not super about Fujian, chiefly, it's one thing and one thing alone that people point to. She's not nuclear-powered. Worry not, though, because, like we say, China is pushing its way into the supercarrier club, slowly, carefully, and the next one, the yet-to-be-christened Type 004, is shaping up to be it. Nuclear-powered, 120,000-ton displacement, space for up to 100 aircraft, and as many as 5 individual catapults, as per the usual numbers thrown around, and that, no matter how you cut it, is a supercarrier. Opinions are split on what will come next, though most believe that with China then having basically reached the peak of what it's possible to do with a carrier, a class of 6 Type 004s is on the way. And the Chinese themselves, well, they're being typically vague about it. But be it from state-owned media or the state themselves, there is one through line through all their comments on the matter. They are not going to be happy with just 4 carriers. Quite the success, then, all in all, isn't it? Given that 40 years ago, their only experience with carriers came from cutting them up for scrap. Allegedly. And that, we think, should just about do it for today. Long video, isn't it? There's more we could talk about, of course, and indeed there are multiple other stuff chapters that we left on the cutting room floor of this episode. But for painting you an overall picture of the general direction with clear ups and downs, what we have shown you today is more than adequate. And what we have seen is that the general direction is betterment, not stagnation or regression, and that the overall scale of improvement has been nothing short of phenomenal. Within that, specific areas have become genuinely world-leading, missiles and drones for example, while others have been pulled up to a standard agreeable enough to rub shoulders with the big boys, tanks and manned aviation we'd say. And others, while lacking to some degree, have still shown impressive growth all the same, looking at you submarines. All in all though, there is now not a single aspect of the PLA that we would say is proactively antiquated or desperately neglected. And that's not bad, is it? When 35 years ago, it was just about good enough to convince Margaret Thatcher that trying to keep Hong Kong the hard way would be a silly idea, and whose generals spent the Gulf War memorizing how to say, "I surrender" in American. That's not to say there aren't problems beyond some bits of kit still needing work, though, because yes, there absolutely are. And it's things like the fact that no one in the PLA has ever actually fired a weapon in anger. That means there are whole divisions of troops who need to get over the fact that, yes, there is a human being in that crosshair. Now stop dallying around and f***ing drop them before they drop you. There are whole divisions of troops who have only learned how to use all of their fancy kit in the controlled stress of an exercise and are not ready for the impossible to recreate stress of real combat. There are whole divisions of troops who have never had to keep their cool while under fire, covered in bits of their mates. It really is basically no one who has combat experience. Zhang Youxia, Liu Zhenli, and Wang Haijiang. They're pretty much the only senior officers we know about who've ever seen combat, all in the 1979 Sino-Vietnam War. Lower down the ranks, you've got a small cohort of officers and NCOs from the 2020 border clashes with India, a few peacekeeping veterans that had cause to discharge their weapons, and that's about it. And then there are the more boring, but just as serious headaches. We're talking corruption that never quite dies, no matter how many big hats do the handcuffed walk of shame on TV. A command culture that still leans toward top-down micromanagement and political box-sticking, with officers more scared of annoying the party than losing a tactical opportunity. Logistic systems that look great shifting kit around China itself, but are very real bottlenecks the second you talk about sustaining big, complex operations over the beach or out into the Indian Ocean, and so on and so forth. Still though, what a transformation in totality. And as we have seen sprinkled throughout the episode, with things like the Type 100 MBT and the Type 004 carrier, it certainly doesn't appear as though they plan on taking their foot off the gas anytime soon. Thank you for watching.